He was a pastor at Thomas Road Baptist Church, one of the most influential evangelical institutions in the country. In 2023, horrifying footage from a Ring security camera caught him breaking into the home of a former church member, someone he'd been stalking for years. Today, you'll hear from Marie Columna, a brave survivor who has finally seen justice. We talked about her experience dealing with a pastor turned stalker, the moment she uncovered that shocking Ring footage, and the response, or lack thereof, from Thomas Road Baptist Church. Here's our conversation. Okay, first of all, who is Sergio Guardia, and how did you first meet him?
He is a pastor at Thomas Road Baptist Church, but the Spanish church in Thomas Road. I met him in 2008. I was married at the time. My daughter was 1. And that Spanish church actually at that time in 2008 was just a Sunday school class. And we started attending. My ex-husband is Hispanic. And we started attending that Sunday school class. And my ex-husband and I became very good friends with Sergio and his wife. And their daughter was the same age as our daughter. So we just developed a really close relationship as couples. I didn't get super close to Laura. I didn't hang out with her a lot, but we would together be at each other's houses or go do things together. And during that time, that Sunday school class grew pretty significantly and quickly and developed. The Thomas Road became interested once a lot of people started coming. And then they agreed to give access to the Pate Chapel, which is next to the main congregation in Thomas Road, and hire Sergio as the pastor. And that's how I know him.
So initially, it was a pretty warm friendship.
Literally became like family to us. You know, when I had my son in 2000, he was born in 2009, they were even at the hospital visiting. And
Wow.
They had their second child. We were, there for them. So it was just very, very close knit. And I never had any red flags and just a really, really nice guy.
Everything started to kind of shift when you started going through a divorce. Can you kind of talk to me about how quickly you felt that shift, or if you felt the shift at all? I know obviously looking back, it's easier to identify where things started changing. But how did things change during the divorce process?
We had moved away for about a year, maybe a year and a half. And we were living in Pennsylvania at the time. My ex-husband was very abusive. So I separated from him and brought my children with me back to Lynchburg. And Sergio and Laura found out and encouraged me to come back to the church. And, their argument was I should come back to the church because I know everybody and there'll be a support for me and everything. So they persuaded me. And it was, really, the shift was actually pretty immediate because as soon as I started attending the church through the separation, they were very supportive of me. They agreed that I should be separated. And my ex was having a lot of contact with them to try to persuade them.
Mm-hmm.
But they never tried to get me to go back to him or anything. But the biggest shift was with how Sergio was treating me. He was just in what I thought was just bossy. Looking back, it was controlling. But he was always giving me advice. And, for example, he said, once I get divorced, I shouldn't date for at least a year and maybe more. And it was like he was dictating when I'm going to be ready. And it was very weird because, first of all, I just thought, why does he even care about something like that?
Right.
And then second, I was going through so much trauma. Dating wasn't even on my mind. I'm trying to survive single parenting and financial survival with a 2-year-old and a 3-year-old. And then all the drama my ex was causing and trying to establish myself. So to me, it was weird because I was thinking, I'm not even thinking of that. Why is he? And other little things. So that's when it started. So that was in 2011. Yeah, I think it was 2011 that I separated and it started.
Did you chalk that stuff up to this is a pastor kind of being more domineering than he should be? Did you chalk it up to, well, we were friends and he knows a little bit more about the situation than most people, so he's got more opinions? Like, where did you categorize that in your mind? Obviously, it annoyed you in some ways and it raised question marks, but what category did you put that into?
Both of those and more. So,
Hmm.
number one was he's a pastor. So, I was just thinking he's a pastor. He's supposed to give me advice. He's more spiritually mature than I am and like an authority figure. And then, second, was his personality is he kind of has that personality. So I kind of chalked it up to that too. And I'm very, I can like brush things off. So it's like, I didn't care. And then having such a close relationship with him, like feeling like he was my brother. So it's like, oh, this is just a guy that's like, we're so close that he just is giving me the big brother advice.
Right. The overprotective big brother archetype. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
So when I was reading back over your story, which, like I mentioned before we start recording, I was first introduced to in 2023. I didn't have a name to you. I just knew, the initial charges and the arrest. And I read somewhere that there was like 6-year period where you were convinced he was stalking you, or at least became suspicious he was stalking you. When did that suspicion start? Because there had to be a clear like prompting there to go, okay, this is a step beyond overprotective pastor, overprotective brother figure. What was it that kind of prompted those feelings or suspicions?
Well, actually, it was a 6-year period between the last time I saw him in 2023. Now, I say the last time I saw him, I should say the last time I had contact with him, he ran into me a few times in public, and he would try to talk to me sometimes, and I would just tell him, go away, I don't want to talk. And I was just thinking, I've never run into someone so many times in public for the past several years, but I just kind of brushed it off. And this is a small town, and his house is close to the same public places he would see me, like especially the supermarket. It was beyond 6 years ago. I would say like 7. It was in 2016 that I'd moved because he started harassing me. And I became very concerned and I didn't feel safe. So I moved to a townhome in Windhurst.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd been living there for several months, maybe even almost a year. And I just thought if I moved, this will go away. And I had a routine, like I'd be gone at like 8 o'clock in the morning and be back at 5:30. And there was one day that in the middle of the day, I had to go home because I forgot something. And so I went to my house and I opened the door and he was in my living room on my laptop. And that was the point that I really recognized because I'd already left the church. I had told him, if I ever see you again, I'm going to call the police. And he stopped showing up to my house. But then I started seeing him in public. I was brushing it off. And then that was the point that I realized, like, this is something way more serious than I thought. I didn't report it to police. I didn't think he's a very, very persuasive man, and he's a pastor and a pastor at Thomas Road at that. So with their influence, I really didn't believe police would believe me or he'd be able to talk his way out of it. And I had no evidence. It was just my word against his. And now that I know, police officers have explained to me that a stalking charge is actually very difficult to get in Virginia because of the way, I think they said because of the way it's worded. So now looking back, I don't even think I would have been able to get that charge. I definitely don't believe he would have stopped, even if he knew I called police, because I feel like he would have just been proud that he got away with it, even with police.
Yeah, it would have emboldened him probably at that point.
Yeah.
So I feel like I missed a chapter between my questions. You mentioned there was some harassment that took place. Was that harassment just something where he very definitively overstepped a boundary in terms of giving you direction as to what to do? What did that look like, and what led to that breakaway from the church in the first place?
The relationship kind of had shifted when I'd separated and come back in 2011. He was kind of being bossy.
Mm-hmm.
In 2015, I waited, it was like 2 years, almost three, by the time my divorce was finalized. I think it was 2015 that it was finalized. During that period, then Sergio was just showing up to my house. And he first started showing up with groceries from Sam's Club, which was very weird to me because he would come unannounced and during the day when he's supposed to be working and bringing me groceries that I didn't need and didn't ask for. Mind you, they weren't doing this when I first separated and wasn't getting consistent child support and had minimum wage job and was trying to finish my undergrad and knowing that I was really struggling financially. That's what made it even more confusing. It's like,
Yeah.
why now that I've finished my undergrad and I have a career and I'm getting consistent child support. So it was just he was just being so nice. So it was very deceptive. And after I think like a handful of times of him just coming every few weeks, and I would even pull up to my house and he was already on the steps. It was like impossible for me. It felt impossible for me to avoid him. And then he was coming, and because of his position and because of the closeness of our relationship and him never giving me any indication that I shouldn't trust him, I allowed him into my house when he would come and whatever reason, like wanting to talk about church events that I was helping to plan. And I call it harassment because it was constant. And I eventually told him, I don't want you at my house. I don't want you coming here. And he was constantly overstepping that boundary
Yeah.
and just up. And then his control got even worse. He was telling me that after church, he sees me talking to men and I shouldn't be talking to men, that I have too many male friends on Facebook and they comment on my posts and I need to block them. Again, not knowing if these were family members or
Yeah.
he said I dressed inappropriately. He was telling me basically trying to control what I wore to church. I'm trying to think what else, stuff like that. I shouldn't be friends. He knew who my friends were and was trying to control who I was friends with, really trying to isolate me from them. So saying I shouldn't be friends with them. That was a very clear, at that time, sometimes looking back, I realized things, but at that time I knew like he seems to be trying to isolate me. So that's when it started. And that was the harassment.
The day that you described where you came home and you found him in your house on your laptop, obviously that's a very definitive violation. What was his explanation for that? Did he try to couch it in anything? Did he try to explain away why he was there or what he was doing? How did that kind of
Yeah.
confrontation go?
He's very good at explaining things away. He's good, but he's not good. So I reacted when I saw him there. It freaked me out, especially because the last time I'd seen him, I told him, if I see you on my property, I'm going to call the police, then moved to a home and never told him where I lived. So everything about that experience was scary. And then being on my laptop. So I yelled, I was like, what are you doing in my house? And his immediate reaction, because when I came in, he was standing, my laptop was on the back of the couch, and he quickly pushed it away. And I was just yelling. And he said, he was like, Marie, he was so happy to see me. And here I am angry. And I'm like, what are you doing on my laptop? Why are you in my house? And he said, I wasn't on your laptop. Why are you so angry? What do you mean? Why are you angry? And then he just tried like redirecting the conversation. And I forgot how he was redirecting the conversation, but trying to turn it back to wanting to talk to me. But the gaslighting was crazy because of how I was feeling And what I saw and what I was experiencing, his emotions, his body language, his facial expressions, and his words were all going against my experience and saying, that's not really what you're experiencing. Like you're basically, he was saying, you're overreacting. Like what's wrong with you? And then I had a hard time getting him out of the house. He was like, wait, I just want to talk. Because anytime I set a boundary and said leave, he was always, always happy and so nice until I set that boundary. And his facial expression would change so dramatically. He has a very exaggerated, dramatic, sad face. And it would be so immediate. And he would say, wait, trying to make me feel responsible for
No.
his feelings. And so that's what he did. He's like, I just want to talk. I felt like I was dealing with like a toddler. And he finally, I kept telling him to leave. And I finally got out my phone. I said, I'm going to call the police. And that's when he left. And then I didn't call the police because I just thought, I don't have any evidence.
So was this around the time that you decided to install the Ring cameras in your home?
Well, what's crazy is I didn't even get any cameras. So for 6 years, I didn't see him because I moved again. So for 6 years, I didn't see him, think anything of it because he really convinced me that I knew he was unreasonable, but he really convinced me that he wasn't this bad. I just kept thinking like he's just so annoying and he's
Yeah.
kind of delusional. So I moved away, and then for 6 years, I hadn't even thought of him.
You ran into him here and there.
Here
but
and there, but not many times, just in public.
Wow, that's so different than how I interpreted that in the news articles, that it was 6 years. I was thinking 6 years of back and forth, but you really had no contact
None.
For the majority. That is wild.
Yeah, it was 6 years. That's why when I saw him on my camera, I was shocked. I was like, there's no way. Because for 6 years, maybe I saw him, maybe 3 times, maybe 4.
Wow.
But especially in the past, the year or 2 prior, at least a year, I think it might have been a couple years prior, never saw him. So, yeah, and we had no contact. Now, I will say, during that time, my ex-husband started attending the church, and my kids go with him every other weekend.
Wow.
So we were seeing him. He was seeing them every other weekend. And again, I'm like questioning. The first night I saw the camera of him inside my house, I was thinking he was there for me. But then the second night, it shows him coming into my daughter's bedroom, which is the basement, because it's like the whole basement is a den. So it's just her big bedroom, but there's a door leading outside. And that night he went in her bedroom, but never went upstairs. And that's when I questioned, like, wait, is he there for me or for her? Like, it became so confusing, and I was already angry, but then I got way more angry because he spent several minutes in her bedroom.
And were you home at the time?
No. So I had taken my kids on Friday morning and traveled to Pennsylvania to see a friend. It was my birthday weekend. So we were in Pennsylvania at the time, and my dogs were boarded. But to answer the camera, sorry, I didn't even answer that question.
No, it's okay. Yeah, that's okay. I'm just mind blown by the fact that there'd been no real contact for that long a time. Like, I can't imagine seeing that footage pop up on your phone and going, what is happening?
I had gotten those cameras only 3 weeks before the break-in, and it was because we were having car break-ins, and my neighbor sent me her Ring camera footage. And because also my daughter's friends, instead of coming through, we had sleepovers all the time. So instead of her friends coming through the front door where the dogs would jump all over them, they would just go through the yard into the backyard And she would leave the door unlocked so they could just come in. Well, they started driving. She was 15 at the time of the break. So her friends started driving. And just because they were driving and teenagers and the car break-ins, I decided to put a Ring camera back there just to make sure that I knew every kid that was in my house and that, protection. Yeah, and that was only 3 weeks before this happened, not even knowing that there was an actual threat. And it was so shocking because I had turned my phone off. We were in Pennsylvania, I turned my phone off Friday night. I turned it on Saturday morning at like 8 o'clock. The first notification was that a person was detected in my indoor camera. And I'm like, well, we had a neighbor that's my daughter's age that lives down the street. And I gave him the code for the front door because we were having packages,
Mhm.
Christmas presents coming in. So I'd asked him, because of all these car break-ins, to come to the house and bring the packages in. And so I was assuming it was him and thought, why would he be there at 11:30 at night though? That's very late. And so I see the Ring camera. It's clearly Sergio. There's no denying it. My brain could not comprehend it. So I ran downstairs and just yelled. My friend was in the kitchen and I said, there's a man in my house. There was a man in my house last night. And I'm showing her the video, and my kids were asleep in the living room and I was in the kitchen, and I didn't know they had run up behind me. And so they were watching the video and they said, that's Sergio. What is he doing in our house? And I said, it is Sergio, right? And they said,
Yeah.
Mom, how can that's, it's so obvious. And I'm like, it just doesn't make sense. So my brain was just like, it can't be,
Right.
because 6 years of no contact.
So he had contact with your kids, though, fairly consistently through your husband.
And
With-
birthday parties and events and Bible studies.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Gotcha. So, I mean, I guess the question, and this is one of those things that is probably infuriating about this, on top of all the other things that are infuriating about this. Do you think this was the first time this had happened? Or do you think this is something where if you'd installed a Ring camera 6 years ago, you would have seen it, or 5 years ago? Do you have any inkling of how much of how much of an ongoing thing this was? Do you think he knew you were out of town because he knew your daughter? How much does that kind of curtain pull back for you now with what you know?
When I saw that video and finally acknowledged that it was Sergio, I immediately believed he had been in my house before, probably many times. One reason I believe that is looking at the indoor camera. All of my lights were out. Now that camera has very good night detection. So it actually looks pretty bright, but it was 11:30 at night and not one single light was on in my house. And he was using his flashlight. And yet he comes into the kitchen and just knows where he is. He's not looking around, not, trying to figure out where he is or learning about the environment. He actually steps in and then goes to put his hand in his pocket like he's comfortable there. Also, I was looking at the footage and I'm like, what is he going to do? Have a snack? He didn't go immediately upstairs to my bedroom, but my bills are there. And one thing I've learned is that he was always gaining information about me. He was able to gain information from my laptop, logging into my Yahoo email, which is a whole nother story. I was thinking he's probably going to do that first. So because of his body language, and I even tested it out when I got home late at night with all the lights out and with my phone flashlight, the flashlight on my phone, it was still really dark. So he knew where he was. On top of that, after I called the police and reported it, I said, how did he know I wasn't home? So I went back to my Instagram because I posted a story and tagged Pennsylvania on Friday afternoon. And when I went back to see who viewed my story, and we're not friends on any social media, we don't follow each other. But sure enough, one of the accounts that viewed my Instagram and Facebook, it was an account named La Familia Guardia, which was clearly the Guardia family.
Mm-hmm.
And that shocked me even more, because then I determined he's been looking, like he's literally been searching me because
Yeah.
I'm not showing up in his newsfeed. So he had to literally put my name in to look me up and to see what I'm doing and to see my activity. That makes me believe he's been doing it all along. I don't think after 6 years he just woke up one day and said, I wonder what Marie's up to today.
Right. You have this ring footage. It's so clearly him. Like, even I, as someone who has never met the person and has only seen his picture and the ring footage, it's the clearest security camera footage I've probably ever seen. The police obviously agree with this. It's very clearly him. Arrest him on 3 charges: stalking, 2 counts of breaking and entering. Once that arrest happens, once your concerns are really publicly valid, did you have support from the people around you, from the church community connected to him? Like, what was the aftermath of that arrest? And, did it match what you expected to happen? Was it different? Did you expect to have all this support? Like, what happened, and how did it impact you?
So when he was arrested, it was a very weird feeling because I was the only one that knew about it. Now, I believed that Thomas Road was notified, but I had no idea they didn't reach out to me. Although I don't think the police told them my name. I think they had to keep that confidential.
It was just like the victim, or you.
The victim.
Yeah.
Mhm. And I didn't have any support. There was one woman that I was friends with at the time, and her dad is a pastor at Thomas Road, but it's like a visiting pastor or something. I don't know his exact role, but he is a pastor. And I told her about it. She didn't give me much support or anything, but that was it was not a good friendship anyway. But she calls her dad while I'm telling the story and puts him on speaker to have me tell him. And he was so upset about it, and very, very upset, but more upset for Sergio and his family and it being captured on camera, and how, basically what he communicated to me is that I need to go talk to the church, Matt Wilmington specifically, and I need to tell them. But he offered no sympathy or empathy for me, but was very sympathetic. He actually said, like, what about Laura? What about her
Yeah.
kids? And I even under my breath said, what about my kids? Like,
Yeah.
his kids, more important. My kids are the one put in a dangerous situation and now are not safe. And actually now I know they weren't even ever safe.
Yeah.
So that really surprised me because I had known this man for several years, being friends with his daughter. I ended that friendship. She was not supportive in any way. And then, yeah, and I just kept quiet which was very lonely, but I knew that I would have a lot of people reacting negatively toward it. Another thing is I knew what people would assume, and people would assume that I'd been in a relationship with him while he was harassing me coming to my house. At one point, I was going to go to the church leaders and report it. And I kept going back and forth in my head because I didn't totally trust them. I wasn't sure how they react. And
Sure.
finally, there was a point where he told me that all the pastors at the church and his own family members, like his dad, his mother-in-law, his wife, had all approached him at different times and told him that they were concerned about all the attention that I give him, basically creating a narrative but they're telling him that I'm pursuing him, I'm contacting him. And that just made me not want to report it because I thought they already have a narrative. They already have a
Yeah.
story. They're going to defend that if I come, because I guarantee he's already also prepared them for what I'm going to say.
Sure.
And how crazy I am.
Well,
So
and who knows how long he was building that thread up too,
I think he already was before I even knew that because he was trying to coerce me into a relationship. He was telling me he was in love with me. He wanted a relationship with me. It really took me off guard because he had no struggle. Like, he was willing to have an affair, and he's a pastor, and he had no moral struggle. And even people that aren't a pastor would have some sort
Yeah.
of struggle with that. And there was none for him. So that made me believe he's had affairs before and this is really nothing for him. But when I'm telling him, don't come back to my house, I don't even want you here, he's showing up and telling me how much he loves me and still trying to control little things about my life.
Yeah.
So it felt like, oh, he already thinks we're in a relationship, or he's already saying we're in a relationship. Like,
Yeah.
I don't have a
Yeah, he's entitled
so
to you. Yeah.
he's entitled completely.
Yeah. I noticed that was even the statement put out by the Southern Baptist Convention of Virginia. The response was similar to that of the church, which is that he's no longer employed. We've been made aware he's dealing with legal matters, and because the legality is involved, we have no further comment. We continue to pray for the Guardia family during this time. No mention of you, your family, the mom who has a guy coming into her daughter's room at 11:30 at night. Well, this week, obviously, there's a big update to this story. Thursday, March 13th, Guardia was found guilty on all 3 counts: stalking, breaking and entering. How did you feel walking out of the courtroom with there being a guilty verdict?
I felt so much relief when that verdict was read. I have never felt such a relief and such validation. I've had a good support group of men and women, and I felt validated by some people and their statements and their support and everything, and really believing me. But when 12 jurors all agreed that he was guilty of each crime, and the crimes were serious, and the prosecutor did a very good job at describing what each crime meant. I mean, even the description was pretty serious. And the lawyers at the last minute, well, at the end, near the end of the trial before deliberation, they agreed to add trespassing to the breaking and entering. So instead of having guilty or not guilty, they added one more option. So instead of saying not guilty, they could say trespassing. And that scared me because they might have determined guilty, but now they have a lesser thing. They could say, well, instead of guilty of breaking and entering, we could just say trespassing instead, which it definitely wasn't trespassing. But to know that that was even put in there and he could have gotten a lesser charge, it's just like they believed me, especially when his wife testified. He used her as a witness, and she testified and had, I mean, a lot of lies, and they were very specific. And their whole defense was just an attack on me. And they had changed the story to where I was the one pursuing him. They were using details that were not true, but they were very detailed and specific to make it more believable.
Yeah.
Even using part truths and, trying to convince the jury that I was the one pursuing him. I was obsessed with him. I was finding out where he was. His wife was telling me not to have contact with him anymore, saying that I had texted him and messaged him on Instagram, which they had no evidence of. But after all of that, even with that, all 12 people still agreed that
Yeah.
he was guilty. So that was extremely validating. And then just feeling, walking out of there feeling like I do have power. He's taken my power away and made me feel powerless for so long. And it took so much for me to follow through and do what I did, knowing I was going to have a battle. I knew what was going to come at me. I honestly didn't expect it to be this bad.
Mm.
But even through that all and refusing to accept the plea deals that were thrown at me constantly and knowing that there was a chance that he would be found not guilty and not get any kind of charge or repercussion, through that battle and that hardship, I recognized after the trial and after that verdict that I do have power. And even if the verdict was not guilty, I still had power to make the choices, to use the law, to do whatever I could to make my family safe.
Yeah.
But especially with the guilty verdict, it definitely gave me my power back
Yeah.
and power for other women. Because yesterday I was thinking, like, did this really just happen? Did I really just go through this whole process for a year and a half and calling the police 2 nights in a row and giving them all the evidence and giving them my entire testimony like 500 times to police, to prosecutor, to victim's advocate, to everyone else, to all these court cases, and actually win? Well, the prosecutor won and all the rest of the witnesses, but we won this and held a pastor accountable, but not only holding him accountable, not only a pastor, but a pastor at Thomas Road Baptist Church.
Yeah.
That to me was just like mind blowing because I knew that they had a lot of influence in this town. They have a lot of money. They have a lot of power. They know a lot of people. And I just, even knowing all of that and saying they're going to use all the power that they have to make this go away, I was still willing to fight. And I said, at least I have to try. And to know that with that power and influence, we still won makes me feel really good. And I hope other victims can see that
Hmm.
and recognize their power. They might look powerful and they are powerful. I won't deny that. But we have power too. And especially when people come together and support, because there's no way I would have done it on my own. I was very lonely and isolated before it came on the news. When it broke, and then I contacted WSET and was willing to do an interview with them. When my interview went public, that's when, because I didn't ask anyone for support, that's when all of the support just came to me.
Hmm.
And I was shocked. I was not expecting people to care. And I couldn't have done it without them because I can't imagine going through this entire process, having to deal with Thomas Road, Sergio, and everyone else without them. I would have had the courage. I just don't think I would have had the stamina
Yeah.
and the perseverance, without them.
I know you may have answered this question a little bit already in part, but I wanted to ask directly, what are some of the biggest takeaways you hope people have from this conversation?
First of all, anyone that has experienced clergy abuse from pastors, spiritual abuse, but especially from a position of a pastor, any position of power, I want to give them hope. I want them to say, if she can do it, so can I. No matter how powerful that church is, or denomination is, or that pastor is, I want them to have hope and know that they have power too, and they also have support. They will not be alone in this fight. I also want to bring awareness to what's going on in the churches because this is way too frequent. And I believe that there are so many pastors abusing people because they're allowed to. No one's doing anything about it. And not just the leaders, which it should be the leaders holding other leaders accountable, but there are members in the church that know things and do nothing.
Right.
And in their effort to protect religion, they neglect the victim. And that is not love. They say God is love. That is not love. God doesn't need protecting. Pretty sure he can do that on his own. He doesn't need us to protect his name or him in any way. And also the last thing I want from this is I want pastors to see this, and I want them to be afraid of consequences, and I mean scared and afraid, like the healthy fear that we should have when we do something wrong. I want pastors to know, like, oh, the victims will do something about it, and they will have support, and we will get in trouble. We will be held accountable. So I think that's important, and I'm glad that my situation, if anything good came out of it, well, one is I met a lot of awesome people, and then two is I'm able to use this to bring awareness and to make sure as best as I can that it stops as much as possible.
Well, thank you so much. I know I said a short conversation. I had a couple questions, and I ended up talking a lot longer than you probably expected. But I really do appreciate it, and I really appreciate the thorough answers, and am glad people can hear your story. And definitely stay in touch. I'm really curious to see what happens during the sentencing.
Yeah, and I really appreciate you being interested in the story and allowing me on your podcast and asking me the questions and giving not just me a voice, but I feel like my voice is the voice of other victims. So I appreciate that.